I was working on my bicycle, so I got grease on my hands. On this episode, I want to talk about prices in India as a foreign tourist. If you're an Indian person, this video doesn't really apply to you. You already know what you're doing. This is mainly for Western tourists who are planning to visit India on holiday. So I have rupees here. This is 500 Indian rupees, or about $5.5 US, or about 4 British pounds. As a foreign tourist visiting India, I would get used to the larger bills, like the 200s and even the 500. You're not going to really be using stuff under 100. A roadside chai will be like 20 rupees, which is like 20 cents. Or some of them might even be less than that. I've got a chai in Varanasi for as low as like 10 rupees. But that's pretty much it. Maybe some street food items you might get for like 20 to 50 rupees. But most things, like most services and most quality food are going to be at least a couple hundred rupees. For example, you're never really going to get a rickshaw for most distances in any pretty major city for anything under 100 rupees, especially if you're going like a decent distance. That's just not, if you're going a short distance, then maybe, but most rickshaws are going to be a couple hundred at least. And that's just the going rate. That's what the locals pay. Even with these like bigger bills, supposedly, it's still Trump change for the average Western tourist. A 500 rupee bill, if you're a British tourist, that's 4 British pounds. So you can get a nice meal in a nice restaurant in like a lot of Indian cities for 500 rupees. The average hotel room with regarding accommodation, and that's another thing I wanted to touch on, is India is just not a budget travel destination. It's a lot of the cities in India are like every typical major Asian city, like Mumbai, for example. You can have like really luxurious, like some of the most luxurious accommodation you could find on planet Earth, and then also on the extreme end, some of the cheapest. But with the cheap, it's just not it's pretty less than desirable. I wouldn't recommend going for cheap accommodation because you really sacrifice quality. So if you're looking at per night with accommodation on average in India, because obviously it fluctuates, Mumbai, kind of an expensive city for the most part compared to other cities in India that I visited personally, I would recommend for accommodation at least 3,000 rupees. I know some people are going to jump in the comments and be like, that's too much. I would recommend that. If you're just staying in private rooms, not talking about hostel dorm rooms, those are a lot cheaper, but no less than 3,000 rupees, just because hotels, you want to get something decent, because cheap hotels in India aren't the best. You have to spend money to get quality. It's not like Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, where you can spend $5 and get something decent. If you really, really want to like budget travel and spend like $1 a day, I just wouldn't recommend India at all. So 3,000 rupees for the accommodation at minimum a day. That's about 33 US. That's 24 British pounds for a private room. So I don't think that's too much. That's still pretty cheap, but it's just not for like really extreme, these like really extreme backpackers that just refuse to spend more than $1 a day. So yeah, 3,000 for accommodation per day, and then at least for meals, like I would spend like a good 500 to 1,000 rupees per day. So about $5 to $10 a day on food. And that's restaurant food. You could still theoretically spend way less than that per day on food in India, but it would just be street food, and I just don't really recommend that. I know it's controversial to say the travel sphere on the internet because people are obsessed with eating street food, Westerners are. I just wouldn't recommend it because with street food, I feel like you run the risk of getting sick, for one. And also in India, where the food is so rich and good, you sacrifice quality. Same with the accommodation if you go super cheap. And it's like fast food. It's like McDonald's in America. It's just something quick carbohydrates for on the go. It's not for really good quality. And if you just eat street food the whole time, you'll one, get sick probably, and then two, it's just not the best. You won't have a really good impression of the country's food. So I just would recommend in India, go to the restaurants. It's way higher quality food, and it's still pretty cheap for Western standards. You know, $5, $10 a day for a nice meal at a restaurant. For the best Indian food on earth, yeah, you can't beat that. I mean, when I was in South Delhi, I had a really nice meal. It was Punjabi meat. It was about 18 USD. So the most extreme expensive food in India will still be, no more than the most expensive state here in the US. US, California. 2 years ago when I was in Belize before I went to India, I met this British couple and they had just finished a trip around India and they didn't like it. They had like this horrible experience. And I was like, why? What happened? And he was like, well, we didn't like the food. I was like, what? Yeah, you know, India is known for its flavor and it's some of the best cuisine in the world. So I was curious. I asked, I was like, why didn't you like the food? And he was like, well, it's not as good as the Indian food in London. I was like, where were you eating? And he was like, well, me and my spouse, we only ate street food the whole time we were in India. I was like thinking to myself, I was like, well, that's why, bro. You didn't go to a restaurant. You ate street food the whole time. The street food is not going to be as good as a restaurant food or home cooked meal. It's like, that would be like saying I went to the United States and I didn't like the food, and you ask why, and they're like, well, I only ate McDonald's the whole time. It's like, well, that's the cheapest, fastest food you can get. For food, I would do, you know, 500 to 1,000 a day. So, and then in transportation, depending on how far, you know, how much miles or kilometers you cover each day. For transportation, I would do the same, like another good 500 to 1,000 a day. Maybe not 1,000, but a good 500 a day on transportation. Because like if you take a rickshaw from the airport or the train station to your accommodation, that could easily be 200 to 500 rupees. Again, I'll reiterate what I said before in the beginning. You're not going to get a rickshaw across any major city in India for anything less than 200. Traveling around India for a budget, I would say for food, transportation, accommodation, I would, for one person, I would travel on about 10,000 to 5,000 rupees per day for a trip to India, a quality trip to India. And I need to reiterate and put emphasis on quality. That's about 55 US dollars or 40 British pounds per day or 80 British pounds per day to over $100 a day. Fluctuates, but no less than 5,000 rupees a day. And I think you'll have a decent experience. One more thing about accommodation is I would book things ahead of time on apps. There's a couple of apps. Booking Works for accommodation. That's what I used. I also use Hostelworld for hostels. There's, but the two most popular ones that Indian people, locals use is Make My Trip and Go Abibo. I didn't really use Make My Trip that much. I mostly used Booking and Hostelworld. Those work perfectly fine and you'll get decent prices. I wanted to touch on a kind of a controversial subject in the travel community online is this idea that Westerners, when they go to places like India, they have to haggle for everything from accommodation to transportation to the air that they breathe. And then when you call them out online, like myself, they always respond to this weird response of, well, I haggle because it's part of the culture, bro. It's like, shut up. You don't know anything about their culture. And the fact that you say haggling is a part of their culture, that's why you have to do it for everything, just shows that you don't really know about their culture, because haggling, Indian people don't haggle for everything. When they go to the gas station to put petrol in their vehicles, they don't haggle for the gas. Like, there's a fixed price. Like, I feel like that's such an ignorant perspective Westerners have. There's fixed prices on everything for the most part. Like most restaurants, accommodation, you know, rickshaw, taxis, it's all a fixed price. Like, you don't need to haggle. You kind of look ignorant if you are haggling for everything. Or you're just being a dumbass on purpose for content for your shitty YouTube channel. The reason why I know this is because not only have I been to these places, but I actually have friends that live here. One of my good friends, she lives in South Asia. She's born and raised there. And she tells me, like, yeah, we don't haggle for stuff. You haggle for if your mom is like going to a local market and she's buying a new refrigerator and it's a major purchase, then she might talk the salesperson down a bit. But, you know, transportation, trains, food, like none of it, you don't haggle over it, bro. You know, I get called a Redditor when I say this and YouTube hates it. All the right-wing snowflakes hate this, but like, I just feel like it's a racial thing, kind of racist. They think that they need to haggle with brown people in India because heaven forbid you pay brown people what they ask. You know, when these Western YouTubers and Westerners go to places like Japan and Thailand, I notice you guys don't haggle. You just hand your money over to the prostitute in Bangkok. You don't haggle with her. You go to Khao Sok Road in Bangkok and blow all your money, and I notice you're not haggling. You go to Japan and you pay them for you know, hundreds of dollars, hundreds of pounds for raw fish, and you're not haggling. But all of a sudden when you go to India and the person has brown skin, you all of a sudden think you need to haggle. So it's just an interesting observation. There's one more thing I wanted to touch on regarding the perception on how cheap the whole world is. A lot of Western tourists and Western travelers, Western backpackers have a really kind of frankly outdated view on how cheap certain countries are compared to like 10, 20 years ago. So the world is not, unfortunately, in 2026, a Lonely Planet forum where you would read as backpacking in the 90s or early 2000s, you could backpack through South Asia, specifically India, on like $5 a day. Unfortunately, it's just the world has changed in 2026. The whole world is getting more expensive. It's not just the West. So you have a lot of digital nomads, people who work remotely from Western countries like the US, Canada, Great Britain, European countries who move to places in Asia like Southeast Asia, Thailand, Indonesia, and they're surprised about how expensive it is. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of globalism, unfortunately. Like your Western home country, whether it's England or Australia, is unaffordable. The places you go to are going to be also unaffordable. Maybe not as much as back home, but still expensive. And it's like, also Western currencies are not as valuable as they once were. They're still relatively strong, but your dollars, whether it's Australian, Canadian, US dollars, aren't going to buy as much as they used to 10, 20 years ago. So yeah, unfortunately, when you go to these places, you're going to have to spend more than what you think. And I think a lot of travelers think that it's 2003, and it's not.